Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Came across a Fortune magazine article that it was one of those moments where you go, finally someone paying attention, finally someone listening. This guy who's the head of, he's an economist at this one of the most important banks on the planet. This 159-year-old investment bank. It's a French bank, Society General. I think it's what it's called, General. He came out with a statement that I find really interesting. We've been talking about greedflation here on the program for quite some time. The fact that corporate America has been raising prices through the roof, and there's really no actual justification given the fact that their profit margins are at record labels. And you have this article now over at Fortune because of this guy saying, look, the capitalist system, the way it's supposed to work is, when you hold your costs down, you charge more for things, you make a lot of profit. If you're making the argument that your costs are going up, which is the reason that you have to make, the prices go up, your profits shouldn't be up. They shouldn't be at record levels for sure. But here we are in a situation where there's the claim that, labor costs are up, material costs are up. Joe Biden gave a bunch of money away and people are out there spending irresponsibly. And that's why things are going up, the pandemic and supply chains and all that, and Ukraine. I mean, there's a million explanations on why we have all this inflation. And look, everybody's struggling under it. I'll be the first one to tell you, everybody's suffering under this. Well, not everybody. Our CEOs and our shareholders doing quite well, thank you very much. And this is what this guy's talking about. He said, look, the entire globe, they're struggling from this stubborn inflation. It's got us by the you-know-what, man. And as he has said, costs, that hasn't stopped the record profiteering. I mean, we've heard the oil companies in their shareholder meetings, talking about this is great. We're not going to do any more drilling. We got things right where we want it. We're in control here. And as they point out in this article, that last year's Fortune 500 companies, just those 500 generated an all-time record $1.8 trillion in profit on $16 trillion in revenue. That's enormous. That's a big deal. That's a big freaking deal. And as this guy says, this Albert Edwards, the global strategist for this French bank, Society General, he's come out with a piece that's saying, look, this is greedflation. Developed countries like here in the U.S. and in the U.K. have been seeing these prices go out of hand. And these companies, as I said, are using all of these excuses, every one of them, to justify why they're raising prices. And it doesn't jive. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And I've been saying this for a while. It doesn't make any sense that they're continually raising prices and their profit margins are going through the roof while they're claiming, the other, you can't have it all. And what this Edwards guy wrote in his weekly global strategy report, he said that after 4 decades of him working in finance, he has never seen anything like the unprecedented and astonishing levels of corporate greedflation in this economic cycle. Never in his 40 years has he seen anything like this. Our own Federal Reserve back in January had a report that said that, look, the ratio that, what do they call it? The markup growth. That's the difference between, what they paid for to make the product and what they're charging you. So if it cost them, a buck to make something and they're charging you $2, it was a $1 markup. What we've been seeing is it's cost them $1.05 to make it now, and they're charging you $3. This, evidently, according to this, is I guess, larger than it's been since they've been keeping records. And, again, and I've been saying this for a while. This is what happens when you have monopolies. This is what happens when you have corporate greed. And he has a graph that he shows, and he goes, look, you've had these huge spikes in profits and no labor growth, no costs. Things are going up slowly. Labor costs, the manufacturing costs, raw material costs, those all go up slowly, but profits have skyrocketed. And this is another one of those things where if you lay over the graph that's been around for quite some time that talks about productivity and wages, from the end of World War II up until the middle 70s, as productivity went up, wages went up, kind of hand in hand. And the argument that I make is you had a very strong labor movement. You had 35% of the workers in labor unions going, hey, our labor created that. Our labor created all that profit and all that wealth. We want some. And they fought for it and they got it. And they built the most prosperous working class in history. Sometime middle 70s, you started seeing corporate America, strengthen the spine, buy some politicians, do some outsourcing, start scaring people, and wages flattened. Then you got Reagan to come in and all the anti-union stuff that came out of that, and wages just deadlined. Profits and productivity, they kept going. And this is how we have this billionaire class, massive billionaire class, that we cut taxes on all the time. Now, what Edwards has said is that he fears the supernormal profit margins that these corporations and here in the U.S. and across the globe have could eventually, and I'm going could eventually inflame societal unrest if consumers continue to struggle. Could. You're seeing it all the time. People are angry. People are struggling. Now, he comes up with this idea that, maybe the end of greedflation has to happen. We have to do something. He's pulling back into the bag of tricks from the 70s and saying we need price controls. And I got to tell you, price controls are interesting because we've had them. And I think back to, a lot of the deregulation that happened in the 70s where we had price controls in place. The trucking industry was the perfect place for this. You had the ICC that set rates, the Interstate Commerce Commission. They set the rates, and everyone competed around those rates. So if you were more efficient, you made more money. If you figured out how to do things a little better, a little differently, but everyone competed on quality and service, not on who was going to slit each other's throats for pennies. Is this a way forward? I don't know, because he says, look, something seems to be broken with capitalism. He's saying we could be at the end of this. And I've been saying for a while, this is what the end of the line looks like. This is what, last stage capitalism is. It's monopolies controlling things. And for a while, I've been going, look, where's this generation's Harry Truman to go after the war/pandemic profiteers? Where are the Teddy Roosevelts? To bust up the trusts in these monopolies. Understand, I was looking at some numbers today of how many companies control industries. Your mobile telecom, three companies control about 80% of the market. 3 credit card companies have 95% of the market. 4 airlines control 70% of the airline flights. Google handles over 60% of searches that go on. And you get into the meat production. You've got 4 companies, almost 70% of the hogs being slaughtered, 85% of the steer and chicken. I mean, you've got this mass consumption. And you wonder, why are prices so high? Because they can. And we could go through and spend all time talking about gas prices. Gas prices are happening because, corporate America is not drill baby drilling. They have thousands of leases. They don't want to drive the price down. They don't want to flood the market. They like it right where it is. The cost of eggs. I've been saying this for a while. Why'd they go up? Do we have a shortage? Because understand, again, production costs haven't gone through the roof. We don't have a shortage, so they're still producing. But what do we have? Oh, yeah, they made record profits. And the thing is you look at, the things that have been most inflated, housing costs, food, energy, those things that we have to have, Now remember, we're all led to believe we love the free market and we love capitalism, but you can only participate in a free market if you have the ability to abstain. If you have the ability to go, I'm not buying it. And when eggs went to a gazillion dollars, I stopped buying them. And I actually said it to a couple people online, going, stop buying them. Well, I can't do that. Yeah, you can. Housing, same thing. Housing prices are outrageous. Rents are crazy. Why? Because they can. Perfect example. I wanted to buy a car, and it's a nice car. It's like one of these toy cars that I've always wanted to have. So a friend said, "Hey, I know someone who's selling it. This is the price." And I said, "Absolutely. Oh, that's great. I'll pay that. I'm going to pay $8,000 for this car." And okay, this is great. The person agreed to it. And so I started going through all the process of finding a place to park it and, insurance and all this stuff. I get a call the next day going, they decided that they want to raise the price of that 50%. 50%. Because, car inflation. I go, we agreed on 8. No, we want 12 now. And I did what I would do and I walked away. Fine, you take that. This is what's happening all across the economy. And I don't know how we get out of this because everybody is trying to screw everybody else. And I love that we've all been trained to think like a capitalist. I'm going to get mine. And this is where we are at the end stage of this, where just a handful of companies are controlling the vast majority of things that we need. And it's to their benefit, not ours, not to the workers' benefits. And I've been saying this for years. Once we stopped being workers and started being consumers, this is how we got down this path. They sold us on, we can give up those dirty jobs. We can give up those manufacturing jobs. We can give up those union jobs, those manual labor jobs that paid a living wage that people could have dignity and we can get rid of those. Those don't matter because we're going to get cheap stuff from overseas. We can exploit other countries' labor to get cheap stuff, and our standard of living will go up. Well, you know what? Those things aren't cheap anymore. And corporate America is still hooked on the heroin of high profits, cheap labor, and lax environmental regulations. And they're taking it out on you, the worker, and the consumer. Question is how much longer are we going to put up with it? Are we in the final stage of capitalism? And then what comes next? Because look, there is going to be civil unrest if this continues. Families are really struggling. And you've got a Republican Party hell-bent on saying, no, we're not going to help. There is nothing here for you working people. And that's my frustration. There are ways we could alleviate some of this. But what have we done? Well, we've had the Fed slam on the brakes, raise interest rates, and harm consumers even further. Is this going to bring prices down? No, because corporate America doesn't care. All they care about is feeding the profit monster. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. This clearly not going away anytime soon. Quick break, right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So history was made today. Congratulations, Tennessee. You have made yourself the racist state of the country. But what happened today in Tennessee? Absolutely outrageous. Every American should be outraged by what happened in Nashville today. And the thing is remember this, because we're living a moment that will be in the textbooks if Republicans don't ban textbooks. This is what an assault on democracy looks like, and the kind of assault that we haven't seen in decades. I mean, this is grotesque and angering. Now, in the 227 years of Tennessee's history, there have only been 9 people who have ever been expelled from that state's General Assembly. 9. Now, they actually have the list of what they've done. 6 of them refused to allow citizenship for former slaves. So 6 of them are way back, and horrible people. One was took $1,000 bribe to kill a bill, so he's corrupt as all can be. One was gross sexual misconduct, and I gotta wonder what gross sexual what was it that led to the expulsion, because in a second I'm going to get to a bunch of another one was alleged misappropriation of federal funds. Misappropriation, that's a really nice way of saying stealing. They pocketed a bunch of federal money that probably went to poor kids, feed them or to make sure that they had a roof over their head. Better in these people's pocket. Now, to lay the groundwork, everyone remembers the shooting that happened the other day. Someone went into a school, fired off 152 rounds, murdered 6 people. 3 of them were 9-year-olds. 3 of them were 9-year-old children. And you immediately had the Republicans in Tennessee come out and say, oh, this is tragic. It's a shame. But we're not doing anything. Don't bother. This is just how it's going to be. So people got a little inflamed. People got a little loud. And you had 3 representatives who took to the floor to voice their displeasure after being told to shut up and have their microphones turned off and all of the things to try and block representatives from speaking on the floor of their General Assembly. One of them had a bullhorn, a little megaphone, actually. So this evidently is cause to expel them. Now remember, the only people who have been expelled before were people who denied 6 people who denied former slaves citizenship, 1 who got convicted of bribery, 1 gross sexual misconduct, and again in a second, and another one who stole federal money. All this guy did was speak into a microphone when they shut off the microphone that's in the General Assembly. So today what happened is 2 of the 3 members, 2 black men and a white woman, 2 of those 3 were ousted, expelled, thrown out, kicked out of their jobs. One by a vote of 72 to 25, another by a vote of 69 to 26. I want to know who the ones who changed their vote are. Now, can you guess of what I laid out? 2 black guys and a white woman, who the 2 were that were thrown out? Can we guess? Anybody fancy a guess on because the numbers are there already. You don't need to go far to figure it out. Yeah, the 2 black guys got thrown out. Was there any question of that in Tennessee? Now, what I loved is as this Representative Justin Jones was defending himself, he said, "Look, you're going to throw me out for talking into a megaphone. when there's a member of this body who's been convicted of domestic violence. There's a former speaker and a current member under federal investigation. Someone peed on a member's chair. You have an admitted pedophile. Yes, yes, there is an admitted pedophile. So child molesters, domestic abusers, corrupt politicians, those are fine. But how dare you talk loudly into a megaphone? I mean, my first thought was every Democrat tomorrow should show up with a megaphone on the floor. And for the rest of this session, until these two men are back in the General Assembly, should be using a megaphone every day. This is an absolute disgrace, an absolute assault on democracy. And look, it's an attempt to silence people who want that Tennessee General Assembly to do something to protect the children. We're not talking about that anymore. We're talking about someone they were bad. They didn't know their place. And this is kind of a big deal, I think. Now, I guess what's going to happen is they're going to have a special election. And do you think these two guys are going to go back to their districts and lose? Oh no. And what Republicans have done is they've made these two guys now the next generation of MLKs, the next generation of John Lewis. They've made these guys the future face of a movement. They had their minute. They've got their minute. They've silenced the people who didn't know their place. And I come back to this moment where you look at the fact that only 9 people have been expelled from that body over 227 years. And now 2 more are going to be added for talking into a megaphone. How do you think history is going to remember that? Now, again, remember, Tennessee's a state that has racial problems for generations. You go back to, they were one of the states who mastered the convict lease programs, where they would arrest a bunch of black men, throw them in jail, and then force them to go break strikes in the mines while the governor made money off of their labor. Yeah, that's their history. So am I surprised that this went this way? No, not at all. Not even a little bit. But we're in this moment where I hope people are paying attention to what the Republican Party has become. And it saddens me that the Republican Party is this kind of authoritarian. And if you needed a reason to start looking at voting rights and start looking at racial issues in places like Tennessee and to undo what the Supreme Court has done, I don't know how else you do this. Because if they get away with it here, if Ron DeSantis gets away with throwing state's attorneys off the rolls because he doesn't think he's doing the right job, and then appointing his kind of attorney, aren't you concerned? And I know I hear it all the time. They should have known their place. Their place is defending those kids. I wish Republicans would think about children as much as the rest of us do. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Lots to get to. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day trade union leader and suffragist Rose Schneiderman was born. She arrived from Poland and settled in New York City with her family as a child. Her father died soon after, and Rose entered the workforce at the age of 13. She sewed caps, and organized with the United Cloth and Cap Makers. Rose became a chief organizer with the New York Women's Trade Union League and played a prominent role in the 1909 uprising of the 20,000. While touring Ohio to rally support for women's suffrage in 1912, Schneiderman said, "What the women who labor wants is the right to live, not simply exist. The right to life as the rich woman has the right to life, and the sun and music and art. You have nothing that the humblest worker has not a right to have also. The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too." She grew frustrated with the privileged middle-class women of the New York Women's Trade Union League and began organizing with the ILGWU. But she soon quit, aggravated by the leadership's indifference towards organizing women workers. Schneiderman devoted her energies to women's suffrage. She would soon return to the Women's Trade Union League. By 1926, she served as its national president and became close friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. President Franklin Roosevelt appointed her to the National Advisory Board, where she wrote NRA codes for industries with women workers. Labor historian Annalise Orleck noted Schneiderman attacked sexual segregation in the workplace, tried to unionize women, called for state regulations of working conditions. She argued for comparable worth laws, government-funded childcare, and maternity insurance. Those ideas and dreams are the legacy of Rose Schneiderman. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
I have to concede one point. Today's far-right Republican Party does not discriminate against women. In fact, the GOP is giving its female political buffoons a higher profile than its male bozos. Consider Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, who became a star in the new Republican crusade to bring back child labor abuse. Pushed by their corporate backers, GOP governors and lawmakers exclaim that the answer to America's so-called labor shortage is not to make jobs more attractive, but to fill them with cheap, compliant children. Huckabee Sanders rushed to the aid of these corporate powers, eliminating a bothersome Arkansas law that had required Tyson, Walmart, and other big employers to get a special state permit to put any child under 16 to work. The meddling hand of big government creeping down from Washington, D.C., she bellowed, will be stopped cold. We will get the over-regulating, micromanaging, bureaucratic tyrants off your backs. So she is using the meddling hand of big state government to creep into the lives of vulnerable children. She is not alone. Ohio's Republican-controlled state government is moving to extend the number of hours bosses can make children work. Iowa wants to let 14-year-olds work in industrial freezers and laundries, and Republicans in Congress have shrunk the number of investigators and lawyers policing child labor abuse, so abusive corporate managers know there is little chance they'll be caught. Most damning, these corporate politicians value children so little that they've set the maximum fine for violating the workplace safety of minors at $15,000 per child. For multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that devaluation makes it much cheaper to endanger children than protect them. This is Jim Hightower saying America should not even be talking about child safety rules in dangerous workplaces. It's shameful to have any children working there.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Our a-hole of the day, Kansas speaker, Republican speaker, Daniel Hawkins. You look at a picture of this guy, you get this sense that he spends a lot of time thinking about children's genitals, which is why they passed this bill to inspect. Got to inspect, and I'm like, how are you going to do this? Because I'm thinking about football. I'm thinking about, you're going to put up a little tent, like they do for the concussion protocol, only now it's the genital protocol. Is this the future of where we're going? Crazy. Nuts. And again, I have some problems with how things are being done, but this ain't it. This ain't it. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on just how crazy today was and historic. I've asked our good friend Sarah Burris to come talk with us. She's a reporter over at Raw Story. RawStory.com is the website. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, happy Thursday. How the heck are ya?
I've been better. I got to tell you, with with all of the craziness that are, just this guy with the genital checks and, what's going on in Tennessee, I don't know how you can be okay with where we are.
That's kind of the weird thing that I feel like the Republican Party has sort of crossed over this line where they're so crazy about trans people that now they want to be pedophiles. Like they are actively advocating for everybody to be. When I was younger, we called him Chester, the child molester. Yeah. So he's a total Chester.
But here's the thing. Today, for instance, there was a story that comes, I think it's Maryland, Baltimore actually, that 150 Catholic priests and others associated with the Archdiocese of Baltimore abused over 600 children.
I know, and that hardly. I mean,
somewhere, and it's the end of humanity.
Right. I feel like that was, and we got that story, but it's like I watched it just die a slow death. Like people wanted to click on Donald Trump and all the other crazy stuff that's been going on, and it's like, you guys, like, do you not see this is part of this larger issue where Republicans just do not actually care about the well-being of children? They only care about pressing their agenda and creating this false narrative about gay people because they're so closeted. I don't know.
I was thinking
maybe closeted, or maybe they just like have an appreciation for glitter and they think that makes them gay. Like it's they're so repressed in so many ways that you have to just wonder, like, what is really going on here?
No, I mean, look, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and these stories were abound, and it's always amazing to me that no one ever really did anything on both sides of the political aisle, Democrats or Republican, for generations. If anything needs to be investigated and broken up, let's not worry about a couple of drag queens. Let's worry about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing that kills me. Is this was something where I feel like that's sort of what got rid of Ratzinger, right? Is they were just like, well, what if we just like kick him out of the Pope house, and then that'll help like solve all of the pedophilia stuff. And you're just like, what?
No, that's not how this works.
People need to go to jail. Like that is the thing. You abuse children, you should go to jail. Call me crazy.
Yeah, the whole altar boy thing was, in my mind was, like, you want to talk about groomers, right there.
Right? I mean, how many kids have been abused at a drag show?
I don't know.
Really, I want to know.
Have we done studies on this? But here's the thing, and this is where you and I will probably disagree, and I'm going to probably take a bunch of crap. But I don't think you should have drag shows in front of kids. I don't want them in front of my kids. If you do, that's your right and your responsibility, and that's great. I don't think it's for them, but I'm also not going to say that you as a parent or anyone else as a parent cannot say yes. If I'm going to say no, that's my right to say no.
The drag clubs, they're bars. You have to be 21 to enter. I even asked, like, because they're all, I mean, they really are all bars. And I asked if I could take my cousin, who is 15, to the drag brunch. And they were like, no. It's a bar. You can't bring her in here. And I was like,
so what are we seeing?
She's not going to drink.
So what are we seeing then? Because, I'm seeing all of these images of that are being put out, that you've got all of this obscene kind of stuff happening, and then they pan to the crowd and it's all kindergartners horrified. Is that real?
No. What is really happening is that there is a program called Drag Queen Story Hour. And drag queens go to the library and they read a book. Usually it's a book about acceptance and love and compassion and all of the things Republicans hate. And they just do it in full drag. They're not telling silly jokes about their, outfits or their boys that they've been dating or like anything. They're not talking about their penis. They're not talking about anything. Like they're literally reading a children's book about the penguins in the zoo who are gay, right? Like it's something that Republicans have found to make up stuff about and freak people out, because this idea, like, old people get nervous when they see a dude in a dress, right? Like that's really all it is I think people are just fighting this culture war that they've already lost. And you're going nowhere with it, bro. Like it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I got to tell you though, I've seen a couple of dudes in dresses, and my reaction is always the same. I kind of chuckle and go, yeah, "Good on you," or "Try harder." There is judgment. There's judgment there, and I don't like to admit that, but there is. But I think that's okay, right?
That's the really important part of Drag Race, right? Like when you watch Drag Race, it is important to have judgment because you have to be able to say, like, look, like George Santos was not a good drag queen. He just wasn't. I mean, I know he was trying. Like the outfit was kind of there. The makeup was a catastrophe. The wig was a joke. Like it was terrible. But you know, there are girls who do a heck of a drag act with some amazing costumes and just ridiculous wigs and makeup, and you know, that's why they succeed, and George Santos just gets to fake his way to Congress.
Yeah, see, I think I'd make a really ugly drag queen, so I'm not going to do it. I've been to drag shows. I've been to a drag show. My wife and I went years ago. I think she still got the picture of me laughing as the guy grabbed my behind. But it was. What do you call? It's still a guy, right? The drag queen.
If she's in drag, it's a she.
Okay,
because it's the queen.
I'm going to work on that. Because look, how hard is that? How hard is it to not be offensive? And this is my problem in all this. If you don't want to dress up in a dress, and I think, again, I would look like a really ugly drag queen, I'm not going to do it. In fact, they don't make dresses big enough, I don't think. But you don't have to agree with it. You just don't be an a-hole about it.
Right? I mean, just based on your experience, did you have to be 21 to enter?
Yeah, it was
a bar.
We were in our 30s.
See, like this is not something that is being shoved down the throat of kindergartners. And it's not like, you know, you're being forced to bring your kids to drag story hour. It's an option. I mean, you just bring your kids if you want them to come, right? Yeah. Like this is not, I don't understand why this is a thing, but
it's because I know why it's a thing. Because it's something to make us angry at each other and to fight over each other. And for one side to beat up the other side. Because look, I think the left is just as bad as the right on some occasions. Because there are some people who just don't care. But now we're going to force it on you. And now they're forced to care. I think most people are like me. I don't care. Live and let live. You live your best life. I'll do the same. We'll all be good. How hard is that?
But it is a heck of a lot easier to throw a fit about a drag queen than it is to solve, you know, the economic crisis or inflation or all of the things that Republicans ran on in 2022.
No, you're absolutely right. And look, let's flip over to what's going on in Nashville and in Tennessee. Perfect example. It's easier to make a story about something else than to deal with the real problem, which are 3 murdered 9-year-olds and 3 murdered staff people. You had 6 people who were murdered by someone who got a gun, who had clear mental issues that should have been red flagged. 152 rounds expelled. They're not talking about that. They're talking about one guy who talked into a megaphone and another guy who said some loud words, and a white woman who was there. She didn't get held accountable, of course, because that's not how we do things in Tennessee. But the 2 black guys, they got ousted.
Right? That's my favorite part of this whole thing is that they do the vote and the white lady, they're like, well, she didn't hold the bullhorn. And you're just like, oh my God, you really are racist. Like there's no way to hide this, you guys. You basically just showed the world that not only are you just wretched human beings, but you're also really big racists.
And are we surprised by that? Are we shocked?
And that's kind of what happened today too. And I mean, this is a state. Tennessee is like the 7th in the nation for gun violence. Tennessee, like we're not talking about Baltimore, Maryland, or New York City, or you know, LA. This is Tennessee, and they've got so much gun violence that that this has become such a serious issue. I think it's like, I don't want to say like in the lower 80s of the people in Tennessee want to see background checks. They want to bring back some of the regulations that there were for assault weapons. But the governor signed the new like
anybody can carry bill.
The everybody can carry bill at the Beretta plant or something. and you're just like, wow, you're that guy.
No, but here's the thing. This is the part that makes me crazy. Is I have friends who believe that more guns makes us safe, and I think Jon Stewart, to his credit, brought this out. When do we get that safety? At which point we've got 10 guns for every person that's alive in this country right now. When do we hit peak gun equaling peak safety?
And this is one of the things that Representative Johnson talked about whenever she did her speech, because she was the victim of a school shooting, right? Like she was, or a survivor, I suppose. She was a teacher and the school had a shooting and kids came flying into her classroom and she was trying to protect them. And that was one of the reasons that she ran for office. That's like her, her root, her story. Right. About why she got involved. And she talked about, like, I was in a school that had 3 cops that were there, at least 1 security guard. I mean, everybody that you say needed to be there was there, and someone still got killed.
Hold on. I thought Thomas Massey, the Republican representative from Kentucky, I just heard him scream at somebody in a hallway saying that there's never been a shooting in a school where I see the caveat, where teachers had guns. That was the caveat. It wasn't that there weren't armed resource officers or police officers it was the armed teacher thing. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Like somehow the teachers are going to be so much better than law enforcement or people who are trained. Like they're just going to kind of hold it and like let it fire everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean,
a cartoon.
This is, again, I know it's cliche and I know it's been said 1,000 times, but I'm still amazed that there are people going, no, we want the teachers to have guns, but books, too far.
I know, right? That's been the greatest signs that I've seen at the Tennessee Capitol is whenever they've said, how about books instead of ban guns instead of books or something like that.
That's crazy. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Sarah Burris. Sarah's a reporter at Raw Story, rawstory.com, the website, if you want to take a look at the work that she does there. Good stuff. You've done an awful lot of writing on the indictment on Tuesday. As I said, my position on this is from the beginning, he's never going to spend a day in jail. This isn't a gotcha moment. But there's some stories out there. Any of interest, do you think?
So there was one interesting story where some of the late night guys were debating about the idea of Trump in jail, and Lawrence O'Donnell had this strange, I think, from my perspective of who he is, he just sort of was like, Trump's not going to go to jail because you can't have a president in jail. Like, how are you going to have Secret Service there? And Neil Katyal, who was the acting Solicitor General for the Obama administration, kind of said, look, I got to push back on that because I think that is part of what the justice system is that nobody should be above the law. And if you, like, especially when we talk about these documents, the documents case is like, I think that's the one that really gets him out of all of this. The other ones may get him, but that one is just going to, that feels to me like a slam dunk case where he is just totally screwed.
Because he keeps saying it. He keeps saying, I've got the right. He keeps talking. And this is where,
dude, shut up.
This is where, there was this story going around. Should the judge issue a gag order? No, if I'm the prosecution, no. I'm fighting that gag order.
Exactly, right? But yeah, like, that was the thing that Neil was like, look, I think that is probably the most important thing that we could do as a society is say, no, nobody is above going to jail. I don't know how we do it. I don't know how we figure that out, but no one can be above that. That is the way that our society should work.
Yeah, I have figured it out with the help of my lovely wife. We have come to how Trump can be held accountable. When if he's convicted of any of these crimes, house arrest in a house that I grew up in. No golden toilets, and he's got to clean his own toilet. Got to make his own meals. He can't leave the 900 square foot house that I grew up in. No maids, no servants. He's Secret Service around the perimeter, but he's in that house arrest in that home, and he's got to do his own grocery shopping. and he's got to pay his own bills, and he's got to live like an average American who's struggling right now to make ends meet. Because here's my thing. I am so tired of hearing about Trump and all of this nonsense, because I've said before, I don't think he's ever going to spend a day in jail. But we've got to go through this because I do want presidents held accountable. And I love the fact that somebody's now going, hey, maybe we should be looking at Bush. Maybe we should be looking at what got us into a war. Maybe we should be looking at that stuff. And I want my friend Bob Ney to be able to come on this show and tell me the crap that he was shoveled in front of his face when he voted to go into Afghanistan. I want that. Are we going to get it? I don't think so. But this is the beginning for me.
Oh, man. From your lips, right? I am totally with you. Although you were much more generous than I was. I was thinking solitary, right? Like there are some studies about solitary confinement and that it is really, really terrible.
It's cruel and unusual. I'm a constitutional guy. I think what would be even more, and this is where, again, I'm a bad human being. I think it would be even more cruel and unusual to make him do his own grocery shopping and clean his own toilet. Having to clean up after his own mess in his final, that there could be nothing worse than that.
I don't know. I think the way that they gave it to Paul Manafort, like he was in that fancy cell where he had like his own phone or whatever.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I would be fine with that with no phone.
But they have said that the Secret Service, I've heard a couple of people say that Secret Service would have to go to jail with him because they got to protect him wherever he goes. So to have that in and out.
I mean, here's the thing. Like you could protect him very easily by just putting him in an area that nobody has any access to,
Yeah, again,
don't let him be around other people.
Yeah, the house I grew up in.
Right.
That's where he has to go. That would be, I think what torture for him would be having to live like an ordinary American who's struggling to make ends meet. Maybe give him a job that he's got to go, that nobody appreciates the work that he does and never meets. And at the end the cupboards are empty and he has to go a day without a meal. Let's talk about what the average American goes through and let him figure that out. That's just me being cruel. But Sarah, I appreciate the time as always. Hope folks will check out the website, rawstory.com. My good friend Sarah Burris, one of my favorite reporters. Sarah, as always, great stuff.
Have an awesome weekend, everybody.
Thanks so much, our good friend Sarah Burris. Again, rawstory.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. The war had been raging since 1914, but the U.S. did not enter the conflict until 1917. Dubbed the War to End All Wars, the conflict transformed the work experience for many women. As men went off to fight, industries looked to women to fill the labor shortage. By the end of the war, 3 million new women workers had taken jobs in war industries and at work sites like food production facilities and textile mills. A year after the U.S. entered into the war, the Seattle Union Record described the impact on women workers, writing, "There has been a sudden influx of women into such unusual occupations as bank clerks, ticket sellers, elevator operator, chauffeur, streetcar conductor, railroad track walker, section hand, locomotive wiper and oiler, locomotive dispatcher, block operator, drawbridge attendant, and employment in machine shops, steel mills, powder and ammunition factories, airplane works, boot blackening, and farming." The Department of Labor established the Women in Industry Service to address the needs of this growing women's workforce. After the war, the initiative was renamed in 1920 to the Women's Bureau. Its charge was to, quote, formulate standards and policies which shall promote the welfare of wage-earning women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Yet after the war, many women were not able to keep their new jobs. Men returning from the battlefront expected women to return home and open up jobs for male workers.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Terry's from Santa Fe, listening on KTRC there in Santa Fe, sent me an email saying, Rick, you're correct on all counts. Outsourcing, high CEO pay / parachutes, and corporate consolidation has caused the disintegration of the middle class. She writes, Tennessee, once considered the Athens of the East, is now I just keep thinking WTF. Bombing, shootings, legislative misdeeds, repealing voting rights, racist policies, banning books. The rats are running the ship. And not wrong. The rats are in charge. And no more of that can be seen than looking at Trump's campaign people. And the fact that Steve Bannon is still lurking around. In fact, it just came out that, I didn't mention yesterday that RFK Jr. Announced he's going to run for president as a Democrat. Didn't mention it, don't care. Not an RFK Jr. fan. But Bannon has now come out and said he spent months recruiting RFK Jr. to get out there, push the anti-vax stuff, because you got to push that, and divide the Democratic Party. And we're going to see a lot of these shenanigans. You look at the no labels people who've got $70 million to use to divide and conquer Democrats in this moment. And look, I think what happened in Tennessee today should be one of those moments, one of those rallying cries to pull people back together, to understand that democracy is under attack. And I know my conservative friends who we're not a democracy, Rick. We're a constitutionally limited democratic republic. Yeah, where the ballot box is still the center of the whole thing. The sanctity of that ballot box is what keeps this all together, and not having one side or the other abuse its power. What we are seeing now are power grabs. The Republicans are making major power grabs. The question is can our judicial system hold? We went through 4 years of an authoritarian Trump. We're now looking at state houses across this country where they are literally taking people's rights away. And I look at this trans issue. I've said before, and I've had a couple friends who have transitioned, and in those conversations, I've always said the same thing. I don't understand it. I'm probably never going to understand it, but I hope this is what you need. I hope this helps you lead your best life. Hope this makes you happy. And I'm going to try everything that I can to be helpful. This is one of those moments as a society where they're trying to tear us apart on these things. And I'm struggling with the kind of power grabs we're seeing. And look, this trans issue, I don't get it. But what I see Republicans doing is wrong. And, the Supreme Court, years ago said, you'll know pornography when you see it. You'll know corruption when you see it. You'll know the kind of hate baiting that goes on when you see it. And we saw that today in Tennessee. We saw that in Kansas, and we see it in Arkansas. We see it in a lot of these states who are doing these I got to look at your genitals bills. When does it end? And this is where I'm hoping the sane, the rational, the people who do believe, as I do believe, in our Constitution and the foundation of this country. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness for each individual. I may not like, I may not understand, I may not agree with, but I don't have to as long as it doesn't infringe on my rights. And the sooner we come around to that as a country, I think the better we're going to be, because maybe we can start pushing back on all of the other things that are happening to us that are much worse and much more important. I don't know, like dead 9-year-olds. I don't know, like a couple of generations of stagnant wages and families not having health security or retirement security. I don't know, something like that. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
It's definitely an eye-opener. Things can change in an instant.
Another deadly tornado outbreak ravages several states with more twisters on the way.
When you take on big oil, they usually roll you. exactly what they've been doing to consumers for years and years and years.
California enacts first in the nation law to rein in big oil price gouging. Plus,
it was a historic moment for the climate justice movement.
The tiny nation of Vanuatu gets UN to address climate justice.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The Biden administration, and unfortunately the Democrats in Congress, keep pushing these Green New Deal style agendas. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, they just don't work. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine in East Tennessee, and I'm sure that's the way it is across this great nation.
Hey, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, you ever heard about batteries? Just asking for a few million people and for your grandkids. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, another weekend full of deadly tornadoes.
Yes, the third tornado outbreak in just 3 weeks hit the Midwest and the Southeast over the weekend, killing at least 32 people and causing widespread damage across several states, according to officials. But the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center warns that those areas will have no time to recover before the next round of dangerous storms takes aim at the same areas. While the exact influence of climate change on tornadoes is inconclusive due to lack of data, studies do show that tornado swarms are increasing in frequency and severity because of man-made global warming.
They sure seem to be.
The UK's Guardian reports on new research out of Australia suggesting that melting ice around Antarctica will cause a rapid slowdown of a major global deep ocean current that helps circulate ocean heat energy around the planet. The study projects that if nations fail to cut emissions that cause global warming, then melting fresh water off the coast of Antarctica is likely to disrupt and slow that deep sea current by 40% in just the next 30 years. That's a slowdown that would alter the world's climate for centuries to come and accelerate sea level rise. Meanwhile, a new study in the journal Nature confirms previous findings that the burden of sea level rise is larger, its effects will hit earlier than anticipated, and rising seas will threaten areas not expecting it due to what the researchers call indirect effects. Indirect effects of rising seas are things like damage to critical infrastructure, like repeatedly inundated roads, bridges, and railroads that can cut off communities that need help for long periods of time. But many communities, they say, are unaware of this risk exposure.
So expect the unexpected at this point?
Exactly. But some good news. The Department of the Interior this week announced that the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement has cleared the way for the nation's first ever commercial-scale offshore wind energy project. And offshore turbine construction can begin off the coasts of Rhode Island and New York, a major milestone toward meeting President Biden's goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of U.S. offshore wind energy by 2030.
Well, don't tell Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
In California, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law the nation's first penalty for price gouging at the pump.
Good.
It was triggered by gas price spikes last summer that pushed prices to near record highs in the state. The new law gives the State Energy Commission the authority to subpoena private internal oil industry data to investigate whether oil companies are price gouging and punish those companies for excess windfall profits. The state's powerful oil industry spent millions of dollars trying to block the law, but Newsom signed it late last week.
We proved we could actually beat big oil.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. And finally, a new United Nations resolution introduced by the low-lying Pacific Island nation of Vanuatu and passed unanimously could be a significant first step in making it easier to hold polluting countries and companies legally accountable for failing to tackle the climate crisis. The resolution calls on the International Court of Justice to issue an advisory opinion establishing each government's obligations under international law for addressing global warming impacts. That could affect big oil companies facing civil liability lawsuits in courts around the world for knowingly producing planet-warming emissions while deceiving the public about it for decades. Here's Vanuatu's Prime Minister before the landmark vote at the UN.
Together, we will send a loud and clear message not only around the world, but far into the future, that on this very day, the peoples of the United Nations, decided to tackle the defining challenge of our times, climate change.
For much more on all of these stories and the many we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.brandblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I want to go back to where I started today, to talk about greedflation. I mean, the fact that you've got this Albert Edwards, this, economist for this globally important bank saying that, greedflation is crippling the globe and are we at the end of capitalism? Is this the end of it? Because all the things that we were told, all the things I learned in school, that of how prices and profits and costs and all that stuff worked, not happening now. The fact that prices keep going up and profits keep going up while wages are stagnant, and then blaming it on that's not how this game works. But here to share some thoughts and maybe give a different perspective than what I have, I've asked Morris Pearl to come talk with us. Morris is the chairman of the Patriotic Millionaires, patrioticmillionaires.org, the website. Morris, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Great to be on your show, Rick.
So what do you make of this, this economist who's come out and said, look, this could be the end of capitalism. We're looking at the end of capitalism. What do you make of that?
I share his concerns. I really do. I think there's a reason to be worried. People are getting fed up with this. People are getting fed up with being treated like second-class citizens. And they're seeing the rich get richer. And they're seeing people who get paychecks every week struggling to get by. It's not working. And our society, capitalism, depends on everyone cooperating with it. If we have riots in the streets, that's not good for capitalism. And it's not going to work. And I don't think it's ending tomorrow, but I do see the signs that we have to do something to make a change. So I think he's right.
And this is where I go back to a lot of the policies of the New Deal. The idea that there were guardrails to capitalism. Look, I argue, I'm a capitalist, but not a laissez-faire capitalist. You cannot allow the big fish to always eat the little fish, which is what's happened and why so many industries in this country are controlled by a handful of corporations. For you as an investor, I don't think that's a good thing. For me as a worker and a consumer, I know it's not a good thing. And for society, clearly not a good thing. But I don't see anybody really talking about moving us away from what's going on. Biden a little bit, but not really.
I think we have to. And you think about it, big businesses, big successful businesses always have some kind of monopoly on something. You think of Google. Who competes with Google in doing what they do, searching on stuff on the internet? Who competes with Apple? Yes, Motorola competes with Apple in making cell phones, but it's really a unique product. Facebook, nobody actually competes with the Meta company that runs Facebook. And every successful company has some kind of a natural monopoly. I've just been looking at something simple, Rick. I've been looking at eggs. I've been looking at the reports from this company, Cal Maine, the biggest egg company in the world. They've acquired a bunch of others, so they're getting to have a monopoly themselves. They have like a fifth or something of all the eggs in the country are sold by them. Over the past year, looking, the last quarter versus a quarter year ago, they doubled their sale of eggs. Their profits were up by 800%. Yes, the cost of eggs, the cost of producing the eggs, feeding the chickens, paying the farm workers, all that kind of stuff, it's up, but not even double. Whereas their profits are up 800%. So you're seeing the prices for the people buying eggs in the grocery store are up, not because farmers are making more money, not because the stuff that chickens eat, I don't even know what chickens eat, but whatever it is that it costs more, not because the fertilizer costs more. Yes, all those things are true, but it's mainly up because there's more profits for the big companies that own all of the brands, that buy all the eggs and that produce all the eggs and sell it to all the grocery stores everywhere. Higher profits is what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And they're killing the goose, literally, that lays the eggs. The actual number of eggs people are buying is down a little bit. This isn't going to work for them in the long run of being greedy. And
but supposedly this is where you as an investor, all you care about is the next quarter, I'm told.
Not me. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. I care about what things are going to be like in our country 20 years from now, 50 years from now, whatever. And I think people are just looking at the next quarter. Frankly, I think they're short-term greedy and long-term stupid.
There's a lot of truth in that. But again, I come back to our government policies. And this is something we've done to ourselves, I believe. We had Teddy Roosevelt busting up the trust buster. We had Harry Truman going after war profiteers. We've got a history of undoing what's happening right now. I just don't see anybody who's doing it. And as I've been saying, I call for the next Harry Truman or Teddy Roosevelt, because look, the monopolies are taking over. When you've got the kind of, as you pointed out, Google controls more than 60% of internet searches. We've got 3 credit card companies that control 95% of the market. You got 3 telecom companies, 80% of the market. And then you get into the food, handfuls of companies control the vast majority of what we eat, and that's been allowed to happen over decades now. And it's time for the Federal Trade Commission to actually do something.
I think a few of them are trying to do something about it. I think that a few of our Congress people, people like Katie Porter, people like Elizabeth Warren, understand these things and are trying to raise red flags and blow whistles and call for arms. But I think too many of our Congress people, they go to their big dollar fundraisers and they hear, well, these regulations, it'd be just inconvenient for us. And it's just not good to, require us to do things. And they believe it after a while. They just kind of give up on understanding what the rest of the world is like after they hear from the people they spend too much time with, who are the big dollar donors, and they kind of forget.
Is it they forget or just don't care? It's about me. It's about more for me and the hell with everybody else. And because as a common everyday worker guy talking to other common everyday workers, I don't think corporate America gives a toot about any of us. It's about the profit margins. It's about that what they can if they can take that quarter and squeeze it till the eagle screams. They're thrilled.
I think that's all too true. And it's sad because I would prefer to have people thinking about what their company is going to be worth in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. And it's only going to be worth something if they're still selling stuff to people.
Yeah. And people have money to buy it. Let me ask you, you're an older guy. You've been in this game a long time. You've watched this change. I've had people who are older than both of us tell me, back in the old days, corporate profits were in the single digits. I look at, our economy as a whole. What was it last year was over 10% profit for the Fortune 500 companies. At least that's what the report says. How has this changed in your lifetime as an investor, as someone who pays attention to this stuff that maybe someone like me doesn't understand?
When I grew up, the corporate CEO lived in a better house than everybody else and maybe had 2 cars instead of 1 car, and maybe had fancier suits and could get his hair cut every 3 weeks instead of every 3 months. But he lived in the same world as everyone else. He sent his kids to the schools that everyone else's kids went to. Now it's a different world. The heads of our major corporations can live, behind big gated communities and send their kids to private schools and go off in jets. They don't even know the people that work for their companies. And it's just a different kind of thing. They've kind of removed themselves. I remember Abigail Disney said she knew something was wrong when her parents were going on vacation with her. This is the son of the guy who was the CEO when they opened Disney World, and he had a jet with private bedrooms in it. And it's just like they're removing themselves from all of society. And that's not going to work in the long run because the people are going to stop cooperating. Like the gentleman from SocGen said, Societe Generale. They're going to give up. And we depend, as investors and business people, we depend on living in a country where everyone is cooperating, where everyone is sort of playing their part, and they understand, well, I'm not the CEO, but I'm getting paid fairly for my job, and I'm going to live my life and send my kids to a good school, and maybe they'll do better than I'm doing. But if people don't have that, if they don't have hope, then we're going to have people marching in the street, and they're not going to be paying a lot of money for eggs either.
No, you're absolutely right. The idea that if you work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead, if you don't believe that's the reality anymore, you're not going to work hard. I think you're absolutely right. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Morris Pearl. Morris is the chairman of the Patriotic Millionaires, patrioticmillionaires.org. I do want to change topics real quick because, I've been seeing a lot on social media of people doing this massive freak out about the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now Saudi Arabia, moving away from the U.S. dollar. As an investor, how concerned are you that this is going to be a big deal? Now, this is not new. They've been wanting to do this for years, but I've been just seeing an awful lot of doomsday traffic. So I'm curious if you have a thought.
Well, yeah, it's coming up now a lot, partially because the U.S. government is almost forcing them out. We have all of these sanctions against Russia. Russian banks aren't allowed to aren't allowed to deal with the U.S. banks, almost aren't allowed to deal with U.S. dollars. So now they have a real incentive to do something about that. And yeah, I'm worried about it. I don't know what's going to happen this year as opposed to last year or next year, but over the long run, that is a big part of why the United States of America is as successful as it is, because other countries have to borrow money in U.S. dollars to do things, to buy oil, to buy airplanes, because those things are priced in U.S. dollars. So other countries need U.S. dollars. And the only people that create U.S. dollars is the United States, through the Fed and the Treasury. And if other countries don't need U.S. dollars anymore, we're going to have a big problem. Now, we're going to lose that ability to create money that we now have. And that's going to be very bad. And I don't think that our people in the United States Congress, the Senate and the House, I think a lot of them don't understand that. They don't understand this exorbitant privilege we have. And they're willing to throw it away without even knowing what they're doing.
Yeah. How much of this comes back to, even playing with this debt ceiling and in a very laissez-faire kind of way going, we're willing to do whatever a default would, whatever ripples, whatever chaos a default would cause across the globe. How much of this do you think plays into it as well? I get the sanctions on Russia. They did invade Ukraine, but how much of the other thing do you think plays into this?
I think it's a big problem. I think the people who are saying, "Oh, default, who cares? Why worry about it?" I think they're wrong. I think if U.S. Treasury bills stop being worth what they're worth now, and people invest in, Russian rubles or Chinese currency or in other things, we are going to lose the ability to finance our country the way we have been. And maybe some people want that. Maybe some people want to have the U.S. government sort of lose so much ability to finance the government the way it is and go into calamity. The people that said, I want to make the government so small I can drown in the bathtub or something.
Yeah,
and maybe somehow they think that will somehow benefit them, but I think they're wrong. I think they're certainly wrong about benefiting anybody. I think they're even wrong about benefiting themselves.
We'll see where this goes. I've had a couple of people who have hair on fire. A couple of people who say, look, Russia and China, their currency, I'd be more worried about that collapsing. So again, but the kind of chaos, not good for a globe that just not good. Last question I've got for you. I got to bring up the Trump thing because I haven't talked about it at all tonight. The one thing that you sent me that I thought was interesting, the part where will we find out if he actually tried to use it as a tax deduction?
Well, that is what Alvin Bragg's information with the indictment. There was a sentence that said they were attempting to falsify records so as not to pay income tax. Now, that $175,000, maybe the lawyer paid income tax on it as it was income. He might have. I have no reason to believe that he didn't. But it's not deductible. It's not a business expense, is paying off a porn star. I mean,
I guess it depends on your business.
When you pay off a porn star so as not to publicize your affair, do you deduct that on your taxes, Rick?
I don't have a wow. Thanks, Morris. No, I don't know any porn stars.
Okay. So, but I think most Americans don't. But Trump is trying to tell a jury of New Yorkers anyway, that paying off a porn star is a perfectly reasonable business expense and it's deductible. And I don't think that it should be, frankly.
Yeah,
I
think that's something all of us can probably agree on.
Records is a problem.
I think that's, I would hope that's something we could all agree on. But I wanted to finish on that, Morris. As always, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. Great to talk to you.
Wow, got me in trouble there. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this ought to drive my conservative friends nuts. The IRS is about to hire nearly 30,000 new IRS agents. It should drive them crazy. They're gonna, because this is part of the plan to spend the $80 billion to invest in the IRS, new technology, better customer service, that kind of stuff. Do a better job. Their long-awaited plan, this strategic operating plan, are going to spend $8.6 billion in 2023, and I guess $8.7 billion in the following year. Should drive them good and crazy. Now, look, pay your taxes. And the Trump thing is just one of those things where you go, really? Did you really try it? Yeah, he did. Which is why, again, I was saying for the longest time, why he held on to those tax returns so long. It's not that there was a smoking gun crime there. It's that he's done some shady stuff. Pretty simple. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on one. Alice, how are we doing today?
Oh, I'm totally insane, but that's cool.
Okay.
You don't know. First of all, I'm so tired of hearing about Donald Trump. It's like, oh, please, let him try to escape to Russia. Yay. Shall we set up a GoFundMe so he can buy fuel for the jet?
I would sign up for that.
Yeah, me too, you know. And the second thing I wanted to say is Tennessee has lost her ever-loving mind. I have a friend who moved to Tennessee about 20-some years ago. We were best friends. Well, we're still on friendly terms, but from first grade on. And that place down there is totally insane. We still keep in touch. And her son was in jail for shooting his cousin. Her husband passed away from COVID, and she had it because her doctor, okay, told her that they didn't need to get them because he was into this QAnon stuff, because it would change their DNA. So I'm not surprised that they're going insane and getting rid of Democrats.
Yeah, no, look, I don't say they're going insane. I say they've been there. They're just being who they are. And this is another one of those things. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. They've been telling us this for years. The Shelby County case came out of Tennessee.
Well, that's true. And you must remember, during the Civil War, Tennessee was right there on the bandwagon beating the drum. But they've all lost their mind. And for these people wanting to do check the genitals of the child, I'm going to tell you what. Somebody would have tried that trick, and I don't care who it was. If they weren't a doctor with my child or even with my grandchildren, well, let's just say you'd be having a GoFundMe for me.
You'd see something all right. Maybe in a couple of days.
Yeah. They've all lost their mind.
Yeah. No.
Okay, Rick.
I appreciate it, Alice. Thank you. No, I don't disagree with her. But look, with the Tennessee thing, sadly, this is who they are. The Republicans there have shown their hand again and again and again. The question is will everyone else believe it? Look at the majorities of people. 72 people voted in the House there. 72 of them voted to oust this guy. 72 to 25. How is that state so lopsided? How is that state got so few Democratic voices in it? It's a big part of it's got to be the race issue. A big part of it's got to be, all of the division that's been thrown out. How is it that, I guess some gerrymandering goes into this as well, but explain to me how a state is that lopsided. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcasts, you'll find ours. Real quick, I got to get to this Tesla story. And I may follow up on this a little later. But Tesla evidently, some workers have shared what they're calling sensitive images that were recorded by customers' cars. Now, remember, they tell you privacy. It is and always will be enormously important to us. We as a country, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes in this, as a country have given up on our privacy. Be it social media, be it, everyone's now got a Ring doorbell. Everything's being recorded at every moment. And you got people, well, it's going to slow down on crime. I'm not so sure. I'm not so crazy on that front. But the fact that we have all of these devices that we put into our home that corporate America has the ability to pull the levers on, and no oversight. This is my problem with this stuff. No oversight from our government. And yet they want to ban TikTok, of which I don't have a TikTok account. But if I did, I would want to make sure that someone was minding the store. We are definitely in very bizarre times. But if you own a Tesla, somebody could be watching and sharing your videos. So be careful what you do. Try to be fully clothed. Just throwing it out there. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. The war had been raging since 1914, but the U.S. did not enter the conflict until 1917. Dubbed the War to End All Wars, the conflict transformed the work experience for many women. As men went off to fight, industries looked to women to fill the labor shortage. By the end of the war, 3 million new women workers had taken jobs in war industries and at work sites like food production facilities and textile mills. A year after the U.S. entered into the war, the Seattle Union Record described the impact on women workers, writing, "There has been a sudden influx of women into such unusual occupations as bank clerks, ticket sellers, elevator operator, chauffeur, streetcar conductor, railroad track walker, section hand, locomotive wiper and oiler, locomotive dispatcher, block operator, drawbridge attendant, and employment in machine shops, steel mills, powder and ammunition factories, airplane works, boot blackening, and farming." The Department of Labor established the Women in Industry Service to address the needs of this growing women's workforce. After the war, the initiative was renamed in 1920 to the Women's Bureau. Its charge was to, quote, formulate standards and policies which shall promote the welfare of wage-earning women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Yet after the war, many women were not able to keep their new jobs. Men returning from the battlefront expected women to return home and open up jobs for male workers.
I have to concede one point. Today's far-right Republican Party does not discriminate against women. In fact, the GOP is giving its female political buffoons a higher profile than its male bozos. Consider Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, who became a star in the new Republican crusade to bring back child labor abuse. Pushed by their corporate backers, GOP governors and lawmakers exclaim that the answer to America's so-called labor shortage is not to make jobs more attractive, but to fill them with cheap, compliant children. Huckabee Sanders rushed to the aid of these corporate powers, eliminating a bothersome Arkansas law that had required Tyson, Walmart, and other big employers to get a special state permit to put any child under 16 to work. The meddling hand of big government creeping down from Washington, D.C., she bellowed, will be stopped cold. We will get the overregulating, micromanaging, bureaucratic tyrants off your backs. So she is using the meddling hand of big state government to creep into the lives of vulnerable children. She is not alone. Ohio's Republican-controlled state government is moving to extend the number of hours bosses can make children work. Iowa wants to let 14-year-olds work in industrial freezers and laundries, and Republicans in Congress have shrunk the number of investigators and lawyers policing child labor abuse, so abusive corporate managers know there is little chance they'll be caught. Most damning, these corporate politicians value children so little that they've set the maximum fine for violating the workplace safety of minors at $15,000 per child. For multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that devaluation makes it much cheaper to endanger children than protect them. This is Jim Hightower saying America should not even be talking about child safety rules in dangerous workplaces. It's shameful to have any children working there.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I tell you, I like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know, just saying what everybody should be thinking. The ProPublica piece dropped today that Clarence Thomas, one of our Supreme Court justices, one of the 6 conservative dictators in robes, he's been taking money from a billionaire. And look, we've known some of this stuff over the years, but this piece is kind of laying out just how bad. And now Representative Ocasio-Cortez is saying, look, he's got to be impeached. It's time for him to go. How can you be impartial? How can you make good judgments when you're on the dole? And I got to tell you, I think I agree with her. That's why I've asked Katie O'Connor to come talk with us. She's the Deputy Chief Counsel over at Demand Justice, their website, demandjustice.org. Katie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So walk me through what this ProPublica piece is saying. Because, look, I've always thought that these guys are way too cozy with the think tank crowd, doing the Alex circuit, doing all of this hobnobbing with our billionaire class while making what is they claim a meager salary. Walk me through what the charges here are.
Well, I think there are two really stunning things about this piece. I mean, one is that there is this one particular Republican mega donor, Harlan Crow, who has, over the past 20 years, hosted Clarence Thomas and his wife, Jenny Thomas, probably at least once a year at his many estates throughout the country, as well as on his yacht and on his private jet. And I think that in and of itself, the sheer volume of the 20-year trips that they've taken together and the millions of dollars that Harlan Crow has spent on Clarence Thomas and his wife taking those trips. I think the other really surprising thing for me is just that as meager as their laws are that dictate what Supreme Court justices can and can't do ethically, Clarence Thomas has actually broken those laws. They are the weakest of all the branches of government in terms of ethics violations, and Clarence Thomas seems to have violated them nonetheless.
No, I mean, look, there's a lot of questions about people on the Supreme Court with where they've got a bunch of money. And, I think of Justice Kavanaugh there with those questions, who paid off all his debts, which we still don't have answers to. But, as I go back to, there have been these stories of these justices being in this world, going to these exclusive clubs and stuff. Who pays for this stuff? And what allegiance do they then have to give to pay it back? This is one of those things that I think average everyday people should be paying attention to. And I fear that we've become so jaded that we're going, they're all corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. We have become a little bit jaded, and I think the past 6 years have really taught us that our democracy is in need of a real reform, of a real reckoning with how jaded the American populace has become and how corrupt most of the politicians have become. And make no mistake, Clarence Thomas and his fellow Republicans on the Supreme Court are politicians in robes. But this particular person, Harlan Crow, he has given $10 million in political contributions. Those are the ones we know about. That doesn't include any dark money that he's given to organizations. He's a founding committee member for the Club for Growth, which has been a major opponent of the ACA and an opponent of climate action. He served on the board of the AEI, a right-wing think tank. And he's also given to Ginny Thomas's own political interests, at least on one occasion that we know of.
No, and these are all questions I think that are really important that have to be answered. And I think Thomas should have to stand trial for this. I mean, you're right. Ethically speaking, the people in the robes have the least amount of accountability. Maybe it's time we start looking at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I share your enthusiasm at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling for an impeachment inquiry that is absolutely needed. I do hope that the Senate Judiciary Committee immediately starts investigating these particular allegations against Clarence Thomas. And I hope that the House does draft articles of impeachment just in order to run the inquiry that's necessary to get to the bottom of this. And if, depending on where the facts lead, I hope that impeachment follows. But I do want to mention that I think this latest ethics scandal is sort of a symptom of a much larger problem, which is a judiciary that feels like it is far, far above the law. Yep. And there are a lot of, to the extent that that's the case, it's going to take a lot more than just impeaching Clarence Thomas. to fix the problem.
Oh, you're right there. But here's the thing. Because I was just thinking about this when Antonin Scalia died. He was at an exclusive ranch somewhere in Texas. At the as a guest of the owner, this John Poindexter. And I remember at the time going, who was paying for that? And do they get a lot of this? And I got to wonder, was there anything, because I'd asked at the time, was there anything Poindexter wanted or had in front of the courts? And I had a couple people say that there were things. And I'm going, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with that. And I think we all should be.
Yeah. I think the difference now is, well, twofold. I mean, I think, first of all, the brazenness of what the justices are doing, just having reached a point where they know that there's not going to be any accountability or consequence for ethical misconduct. I think the other big difference between what we saw, 15 years ago with, 5 years ago with Justice Scalia and what we see now is the fervor with which the justices seem to be doing the bidding of the people who are paying for their fancy vacations. We're seeing a real acceleration of right-wing jurisprudence on the Supreme Court. And I think that that's a consequence both of the court having a six justice supermajority and also this sense of impunity that they are feeling. So, the lawlessness that we see with the ethics violations is also seen in the way that the court is creating its jurisprudence right now. I mean, you see the court ignoring inconvenient facts in a lot of cases, bypassing procedural rules. A great example there is how much you see happening on the shadow docket, where the court is not explaining itself or even explaining the law behind its decisions. The court is bucking precedent. We just saw the court overturn Roe versus Wade, a 50-year precedent, and for the first time ever, stripping, the American public of a constitutional right. So this lawlessness that we see in ethics violations, I think, is clearly sort of like running into the actual jurisprudence of the court too.
Well, it's the reason I call them the six dictators in robes, because there's no accountability there, and the joke has always been they should be like NASCAR robes. We should know who's bought and paid for them, because sadly, money is speech. And where'd we get that from? Oh yeah, the Supreme Court.
Yep, that's right. There are a number of laws that do apply to the Supreme Court, and that's why I mentioned that I think what makes today's revelation pretty incredible is that, as weak as those laws are, it appears that Clarence Thomas may have violated one of them. Justices are bound by two laws that require them to file financial disclosures that include, disclosing gifts that they received, including, hundreds of thousands of dollars of paid vacations. And they're also, required to sort of limit outside income, as well as a law that requires them to recuse in cases where there is reason to believe that they're biased. Yeah.
No, but again, it comes back to this money thing. And I go back to, Donald Trump in 2015. One of the only things I actually believe that came out of his mouth is that he bought everybody, that it was the money that he greased all the palms. And our Supreme Court, I don't think is any different. So the question that I have for you is, and with the organization that you're part of, how do we fix this? Is there a way to fix this?
I think there is. I think Congress is going to have to pretty strongly exert its power over the Supreme Court in terms of exercising some checks and balances. I think the reason the Supreme Court justices are behaving the way they are is because they think that they are above the law and that there will be no consequences. So there are a number of reforms that I think the Congress needs to impose on the Supreme Court. First and foremost, the Supreme Court these are the only 9 judges in the country that are not bound by a code of conduct. So there are a number of really great pieces of legislation that would finally impose a code of conduct on the justices so that they are accountable to someone for ethical behavior like this. But I wouldn't stop there. I think that there really are structural problems with the Supreme Court that we see now, based on what's happened over the past 10 years, the flood of money into politics, which includes the flood of money into Supreme Court confirmation fights, a Supreme Court that's basically been bought and sold by Republican donors of the past 10 years, and that's now really out of balance ideologically. So in addition to the ethics rules, I think Congress needs to exercise its checks and balances by adding seats to the Supreme Court, implementing term limits, making these 9 incredibly powerful people more accountable to Congress, to the executive branch, and to the people they're meant to serve.
Wow. Imagine that. Hold on. Let me go into fantasy land for a second. Wow. Because the sad reality is that's not been the last several years, or for a lot of years. So it's almost, I think a lot of us who are jaded are going, we can't do anything when children are being slaughtered in schools. What do you think people are going to care when Clarence Thomas goes on an expensive vacation that some billionaire paid for, or gets his pocket lined? Or am I too jaded, do you think?
I think it's hard to be optimistic right now. We see a Congress that's not very good at doing any legislating. But I do really, truly hope that there is going to be a point where the dam breaks. Congress realizes they've been put there for a reason. Our democracy is on a precipice, and they're going to have to do something to help fix it. And what I really hope is that when that happens, court reform is part of that fix.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Katie O'Connor. She's the Deputy Chief Counsel for the folks over at Demand Justice, demandjustice.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. So walk me through what this could look like, because this is kind of where I want to end, and then how do we make sure it happens? What is the process to impeach a sitting justice? Has it ever happened before? And how do we push the Senate into doing what needs to be done?
The process for impeaching a justice is actually the same as the process for impeaching a president. So you would need the House to have a trial, or you would need the House to go through the impeachment process, and then the Senate to have a trial. Unfortunately, in this political climate, that's incredibly unlikely to be successful. But I think it's still important to air the truth to the American people. And so even if it is, not going to end with Clarence Thomas being stripped of his black robe, it's an opportunity for us to learn the truth about all of the millions of dollars of gifts that he's been getting. Not to mention, the other ethical violations. I mean, the news is happening so fast, it's hard to remember that Ginny Thomas was, actively strategizing with Mark Meadows about the overturning of the 2020 election while her husband was on the Supreme Court deciding cases related to that election. So there's so much to unearth here. And even if the Senate, even if the Congress can't, reach the finish line in terms of taking Clarence Thomas off the court, this is important for us to hear about.
No, and it's important to find out where all the money comes from, because, Jenny Thomas, I don't think, gets the positions of power that she was in dealing with Mark Meadows and a lot of these lunatic groups. I'm just going to say that she's not going to be at the head of this if her husband's not on the Supreme Court. If she's Jenny from the block, she ain't sitting on any of these committees.
Yeah, that's right. It's incredible when you look at people like Leonard Leo and just the incredibly complex network of organizations that he's running that has helped get people like Clarence Thomas on the bench, that is also helping to challenge election results in elections like 2020, and that is simultaneously, participating in coalitions that Ginny Thomas runs and contributing to organizations that Ginny Thomas sits on the board for.
So what do people do tomorrow? What's the marching order?
So I think a call for impeachment is important. I think a call for broader court reform is also really important. If you're interested in that, please do visit our website, demandjustice.org. We have a lot of information about the whole host of court reforms, and I think this is just one more reminder that we really need comprehensive court reform, in addition to and as part of, the broader democracy reform that we all recognize is desperately needed right now in this country.
Excellent stuff. Katie, I appreciate the time. Hope folks will check out demandjustice.org. Thanks for taking some time for us.
Thanks so much.
Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Often, Southern states are the focus of histories of slavery in the United States. But did you know that in the early 1700s, 1 in 5 residents of New York were enslaved Africans? New York merchants had a trading relationship with the Caribbean, which had a large enslaved population. This brought enslaved people to New York. But since there were no large plantations in the colony, most of these enslaved people worked as carpenters, fishermen, or stonemasons. On this day in labor history, the year was 1712. A group of 20 to 70 enslaved Africans armed themselves with guns, swords, and hatchets. They set fire to a building in the center of town, attacking the white settlers who tried to put the fire out. The armed insurrection killed 9 white settlers and injured several more before the militia arrived. As many as 70 enslaved and free black people were arrested for the revolt. Several chose to commit suicide rather than go to trial. More than 20 were executed. Most were hung, and a few were burned at the stake. The revolt resulted in the passage of tougher slave codes. Enslaved people were forbidden from carrying weapons or meeting in groups of 3 or more. Punishments could include whipping. For the next 150 years, this pattern repeated. Slave uprisings in the United States would be followed by brutal repression and a tightening of slave codes. In New York, slavery remained legal until 1799. Even then, New York only adopted an act for the gradual abolition of slavery. This meant that those enslaved before July 4th, 1799 would remain in bondage. Slavery was not fully eradicated in New York until 1841. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do get to the angry, hateful emails as quick as possible, but I do answer all emails personally. Got one from John listening on WCPT AM 820 in Chicago. He said, not everyone needs a union. You keep talking about unions. Why? Unions are a thing of the past. Stop. We don't need them anymore. That's all you talk about. Because I do think that it's what helped build the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. That when my grandparents' generation came back from fighting fascism overseas, they came back home to the shop floors and fought for a share of those profits. Understand, if we had 35% of the workforce in unions right now, if you had that high, instead of 6.6, if you had 35%, do you think, just walk with me if you will here, John, do you think the gross profits, let's take the egg industry that Morris talked about a minute ago, that had an 800% increase in profits. Do you think the workers who drive the trucks and feed the chickens and do all of the slaughter, do you think all of those people would go 800% increase in profit and I'm making barely poverty? I want some of that. Do you think that people who have the ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions would do it? And do you think we would have some of the problems we have now with the just outrageous greed and the greedflation that's going on? And if we did, the wages would keep up. And I looked at my grandfather told me in the mid-70s when we were going through the whole stagflation thing. His union contract had a cost of living adjustment in it. If it hit a certain point of inflation, their wages went up. And in 1 year, they got 3 increases. Why? So their wages didn't get eroded by inflation. Right now, what's going on and what corporate America is doing masterfully and what our government is failing at is the minimum wage hasn't been raised in, 15 years now? 14 years? Wages haven't gone up, basically still stagnant. ticking, profits through the roof. So as prices continue to rise, wages go down. You're still making that $7.25 an hour, but if now you've got to buy, let's say, a Happy Meal for $5, a Happy Meal, $5 can take you almost an hour of labor to get your kid a Happy Meal. Rents have skyrocketed. Fuel costs have skyrocketed. Wages haven't kept up. As I said, corporate profits have gone through the roof. They have seen record profits. And you're going to say workers don't need the ability to demand some of the wealth that their labor creates? And that workers don't need to have a contract? Let me tell you who has a contract. And come a little bit closer and listen really good, because this is important. Every CEO in this country has a contract. When you hear about a CEO getting these enormous severance packages and these enormous, firing bonuses, I think of John Nardelli, the former CEO of Home Depot. When they fired him, he got $210 million. Not because Home Depot thought he was a good guy, not because Home Depot liked him, not because Home Depot was going to make sure that he would have a little extra cheese on his Whopper, not because of any of that, but because he had what? What do you have? He had a contract. And every working person in this country should have that same contract. But we seem to be okay with being at will, at the whim of the employer. Yeah, today you have a job. But if I get a bug up my behind tomorrow, maybe not. Do you think he can be fired for, taking a piece of pizza out of a refrigerator? Do you think he can get fired for wearing an orange shirt? Yeah, you can, because you have no rights without what? A contract. Because again, what we have in this country is at-will employment. Now, I know, Rick, workers have rights. Yeah, some federally protected, some state laws. But that's generally age discrimination. That's generally race discrimination. If an employer just says, you know what, don't need you, there's the door, good luck. As where a contract lays that out. And this is why I'm such a big proponent of unions. I see the numbers. And there's a great graph, as I've said, from the end of World War II up to the mid-70s, as productivity went up at a nice 45-degree angle. Nice on the chart. Perfect. Wages kept up right with it, right there. Because you had unions that were strong enough to say, you know what, this is great. Love the fact that you're making profit. Love the fact that our productivity is making you more money. But you know what our productivity gains are getting? Us more money too. Better health care, better retirement security, maybe a little vacation, maybe some opportunities for education and training, all that stuff. What's been lacking the last 40 years? They've now turned it into our education system is where you go to get your job training. Employers, when I was a kid, you could still find an employer that would you could hire into the mailroom and work your way through places. It doesn't happen much anymore. Why? Because corporate America just cares about the bottom line. And there's nobody out there fighting for you and me. So, John, I feel for you. And I hope this is a wake-up moment. Because I know my conservative friends love to hate on the unions because they support Democrats because Republicans hate working people. But this is where we are. And I'll tell you, if we had that 35% union density, we'd be a much more prosperous working class and a different country. But I want to hear your thoughts. And John, thanks for the email. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. If you miss any of the show, grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcasts, you will find ours. Appreciate you tuning in. Look forward to seeing you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.